I've essentially been jobless for the better part of 2020, as have many people, but I'm starting to get some programs coming in and a lot of other people are going back to work. Now that I've got some paychecks coming in though, that age-old question returns. Living expenses or more reptiles? Do I really need things like groceries or health insurance? Or do I take all that money and make some really bad financial decisions and spend all that cash on some crazy, pricey, awesome reptiles? And remain poor, living off of things like frozen TV dinners and pizzas and Insta ramen, not even have enough money to do laundry like some broke, lazy, poor college student? Hello again. If that bit didn't make sense to you, then you should go back and check out part 1 of this video, which was hands down the most popular video we've ever put on the channel. People really seem to like it, learning about some really expensive reptiles. And in that video, I might have made a joke that Sallie Mae wasn't some company collecting student loan debt, but was actually a person literally choking me out with my student loan debt. So I figured we should do a part 2 follow-up video because there's still some crazy pricey reptiles out there. Not really waiting to be bought because most of us don't really have 10 to 20 grand laying around the house to spend on reptiles, but if we did.
Treat yourself.
Just like part 1, there's a few parameters for this. First up, no captive genetic morphs. I don't want this just to be a list of crazy, pricey ball python morphs. Wild localities and morphs are fine. Things like the Bell's Phase lace monitor are fine, but nothing made in captivity. No crazy albino jaguar things, no blue eyes, white bearded dragons, none of that. And second, these will be for sale. They will have sale postings that I can find, that you can find on Fauna Classifieds, Morph Market, whatever website that you can find them on. They will have sale postings. I don't want to just make a list of crazy pricey reptiles that no one will ever be able to buy. So if you do want these animals, you can find them, but your bank account's definitely going to take a hit, like how you should hit the subscribe button. I should also note that these will be US prices for US sales. I live in America. I am not a breeder. It is hard enough for a non-breeder because I don't breed my reptiles. I'm just an educator. I don't know the ins with these prices. I just look these prices up online, same that you guys could do if you wanted to. I do not know breeding prices really, so it's hard enough for a non-breeder to find American sale prices for some of these reptiles, let alone trying to find global ones. So yes, not a breeder, so I apologize if any of the sales prices are off or not up to date or anything like that. And also, these are going to be for American sales. So in part 1, we covered 2 different giant expensive monitor lizards, the crocodile monitor and the lace monitor. They're 2 of the world's largest lizard species, and they're also kind of known in the reptile community for being very expensive. And we're going to add to that today with another giant monitor lizard. Now, it's not arboreal and it's not quite as expensive, but it is really gorgeous, the Sulfur Monitor. Now, I'm not an expert on water monitors. I've never actually worked with one, but from what I could find, this is a locale of the base Asian water monitor found in small areas in their home range in Indonesia. This is a very large lizard growing to be 6 feet or longer and over 50 pounds. The Sulfur Monitor specifically has the trademark bright yellow and black coloration as opposed to the normal water monitor's much darker coloration. Kind of like my yellow Eurymastix Ricky here. He's got this really bright yellow and black coloration. But whereas this guy I deemed one of the best beginner pet reptiles out there, water monitors not so much. While the Sulfur Monitor is fairly pricey compared to most other monitor lizard species, the actual base Asian water monitor really isn't that much. You can get an imported baby for anywhere from $100 to $400 depending on the size. Now, if you want to get like a captive born and bred worked with one from like Nerd, that's going to cost you a pretty penny, but still, Sulfur monitors tend to be on the higher end compared to a lot of your other varanid species. Like I said, this monitor is nowhere near as crazy priced as a lace monitor, let alone a Bell's Phase lace monitor, but it's still fairly pricey. For a younger one, like 1, 2, 3 years of age. The price is going to range anywhere from $1,000 up to $3,500. And again, this depends on the size, if it's wild caught or not, how tame it is, who's selling it, things like that. I couldn't find many postings for your older juveniles and adults, but over the last 10 or so years, I did find a few. And from what I could tell, the price for one of these is going to range anywhere from $3,000 to just over $5,000. Now, this might be a little bit more outdated because I couldn't find anyone super recent. Regardless, $4,000 or $5,000 for a large monitor lizard is fairly expensive, especially when you compare it to a lot of your other large lizards like your tegus, your iguanas, a lot of your other monitor lizard species like ornates and Nile monitors and things where you can get them for $50 to $200 or so. So it's a pretty big price hike. In part one, we had this really weird armored little lizard called the shingleback skink, and we got another one for this video. For number 4, the sun gazer lizard. The sun gazer lizard is such a freaking cool looking lizard. They are covered in this bizarre head to tail spiny armor, just like the tail of a Uromastix, except everywhere. It has many nicknames: giant girdled lizard, sun gazer for its weird positioning when it's basking, and it lifts up its forebody and it looks like it's staring up at the sun, giant dragon lizard, etc. But of the 50 species of girdled lizard, this is the largest, giving it what is probably the coolest scientific name of any reptile I've heard about and definitely covered on the channel. Smaug giganteus, named after one of the most famous dragons in all of fiction, the giant dragon sleeping under the mountain from The Hobbit. They're natively from inland South Africa, hanging out in high-veld grassland habitats. However, they are vulnerable to extinction because of rampant habitat loss and also over-collection from the wild for the pet trade. They seem to adjust okay to captivity, but no matter what people try, it looks like they can't get sun gazers to want to make more little sun gazers, and because of this, that means the price is pretty high for a non-monitor lizard. Any of the ones I found for sale over the last 10 to 12 years were all wild-caught imported adults of kind of various body shapes, and the price seemed to range anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000. Hopefully at some point in the future, breeders can kind of figure out the trick to getting them to make more little babies so that we don't need to take them from the wild, and that'll start kind of bringing the captive price down. For number 3, we turn to the shelled reptiles, and today I'm joined by Rosie, my redfoot tortoise. And this animal, surprisingly enough, actually came in number 3 also on our top 5 coolest looking tortoises countdown, if you want to go back and check that video out. So, for number 3 today, the Burmese star tortoise. They're an absolutely gorgeous, critically endangered tortoise from Myanmar, which is Burma, where they're unfortunately losing a lot of their habitat. They're being eaten in great numbers by the natives, and then on top of all that, they're also being taken from the wild illegally for the pet trade. Now, these aren't a super common tortoise to find in the pet trade in the United States, but there are quite a few breeders working with them now, down in the southeast and southwestern Florida and things like that. And this one's kind of got the weirdest price gap of all the reptiles we're going to talk about today. As the number of babies becoming available in the United States increased, the price seemed to have taken a pretty steep downturn, much like we're seeing with a lot of Australian reptiles like black-headed pythons and even a lot of your tree monitors and things like that, where the price used to be several $1,000s, but now that price is pretty quickly coming down and you can get a black-headed python for about $1,000 now. So same thing kind of seems to be going on with this. You can find a baby, like maybe hatchling to year-old Burmese star tortoise, anywhere from $800 to about $1,600 from what I can find online, whereas a couple years ago, it used to be like double that. If you want one that's a bit bigger and has some inches and years on it, this is where the price really seems to start to fluctuate. Now, this isn't a massive tortoise. It maxes out at like 13, 14 inches. It's not super huge. But honestly, the biggest one I could actually find for sale was only about 10 inches. I never saw any 12 to 14 inch big ones really for sale. So for a young adult tortoise like Rosie size or bigger, you're looking at anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 all the way up to $10,000. And this really depends on which breeder you're getting it from, the coloring and patterning, because if you remember from that top 5 coolest looking tortoise vid, Burmese star tortoises, they can get a lot of variety with those stars and the patterns and the colors and everything, with the yellow versus the black. So it really depends on what the tortoise looks like, who you're getting it from, and also how big the tortoise is. Luckily, just about all the sale postings I saw were captive born and bred tortoises. There weren't really, I don't think, any that were imported from the wild. And of all of your medium medium-sized, small, medium-sized tortoises like your redfoots, your leopard tortoises, star tortoises, radiated tortoises, all those ones that kind of get somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 2 feet. This really seems to be the most expensive, widely available medium-sized tortoise. So if you do want a Burmese star tortoise, they are out there. You just got to find a breeder. For number 2, this is the species that I got commented the most, messaged the most, should have been in part 1. And I know it's a very expensive snake, but I wanted to put on the back burner because there aren't a lot of expensive snakes out there. And now we are going to talk about the Amazon Basin emerald tree boa. The emerald tree boa is actually a very popular snake among advanced reptile keepers. They are an absolutely stunning display snake. They're not usually that friendly, but they are actually very similar in appearance and ecological niche to the green tree python, like Jade here. And emerald tree boas, they really aren't that expensive. Now remember, they are not on the friendlier side of snakes, but you can get one for a couple $100. Now, why are they on the list? Well, we're not talking about your regular emerald tree boas. We're talking about a very specific one today. This particular species differs from the original emerald tree boa because, as the name suggests, they're only found in the basin of the Amazon River. They're found in southern Suriname, Venezuela, Peru, Brazil, and some other areas. They grow longer than the original species as well. They're able to hit up to 7 to 9 feet, and they're generally darker in coloration and have a different number of head scales. And it's not just those differences that differentiate the two. What's the biggest gap is probably their price. Welcome to what is, at least to my knowledge, the most expensive pet snake out there for sale. A hatchling to yearling can go for anywhere from $3,000 to over $6,000. That is a lot for a little snake. If you remember from part 1, the Bolin's python, I found younger ones for anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. And I could not find really any adults for sale. For Amazon Basin tree boas, though, I did find adults for sale, and the results were... Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching-gery. Money, oh money, how I love thee. For an adult Amazon Basin emerald tree boa, the price ranges from $9,000 all the way up to $18,000 or even $20,000. This is a very, very, very expensive snake. And the color is mostly the determining factor here, colors and patterns, but it also has to do with genetic line and what breeder is selling it and what breeder had it before and things like that. And I couldn't find an adult Bolin's python for sale, so they might still be more expensive than this, but I couldn't find one, so I'm not counting it. But if any breeders do have adult Bolin's pythons or know what they go for, feel free to comment it down below and blow my mind. So in both of these videos, part 1 and part 2, we've gone over some pretty pricey big lizards, some fairly expensive big arboreal snakes. We've done some fairly high dollar armored lizards. But what did part 1 end in? The Aldabra tortoise, a giant expensive tortoise. And just like part 1, we are ending this video with another super expensive massive tortoise. In part 1, I mentioned how the Galapagos giant tortoise wasn't really considered for that video because compared to the Aldabra tortoise, it's a lot harder to find for sale because you actually need a special permit to own them and they can't cross state lines. And I think you actually need a special license just to breed them. But I did find some for sale of different sizes, and I've talked to a couple breeders, so I've changed my mind and we're going to include it for number 1 here. Galapagos tortoises are obviously found on the Galapagos Islands down off the coast of South America. This is the only place you're going to find them in the wild in the world. They are an absolutely massive tortoise, and I would argue are the largest reptile you can actually buy in the pet trade, because these guys can get 500 plus pounds. They can get 5 feet long. Like I said, they're the world's largest living tortoise species. They're absolutely huge. And with a lot of your large crocodilians like Orinoco crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, they're not available in the pet trade for good reason. And also Komodo dragons, the world's largest lizard, not available in the pet trade. Those are more of a zoo animal. So with those animals kind of off the market, and then even your large green anacondas and reticulated pythons, none of them touch 500 pounds. So personally, I would argue this is the largest reptile that is quote unquote available in the pet trade. As I mentioned, there are a lot of legal and state stipulations and laws you have to worry about when it comes to trying to obtain and own a Galapagos tortoise. Like, you have to get them within the same state. They can't go across state lines. You have to get them from a licensed breeder, things like that. Aldabras don't have these, which is why they're much more commonly found for sale, and they were #1 for the first video. And the price for the younger ones is actually significantly cheaper than your Galapagos. Aldabras are also more cold tolerant than the Galapagos tortoises and a little less care intensive as well. I love tortoises, and sadly, because of these legal stipulations and having to get one from in the same state and things like that, means I probably, unfortunately, will never be able to get a Galapagos tortoise for myself. Now for the price. Again, there were nowhere near as many for sale as the Aldabras, but from what I could find, and a lot of the sale postings I did find were like 4 or 5 plus years old. There weren't a whole lot in the last 4 or so years. So from what I can find, if you want a younger Galapagos tortoise, somewhere in the 4 to 5 to 10 inch range, you're going to be looking at $5,000 to almost $10,000. That is much more expensive than for a young Aldabra, but if you compare that to the Burmese tortoise we just talked about, that's a pretty even size to cost ratio. Now I found even less postings, almost none, for tortoises larger than that, like your 1 to 3 foot mark. If you want a tortoise in this size, from what I can tell, you're going to be spending anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. And this depends again on the sex of the tortoise, the size, also who you're getting it from. The females, I guess, tend to run higher than the males do, and there are very, very few breeders with tortoises this size, let alone putting them up for sale. And remember, these tortoises can get 4 to 5 feet, so you're spending $20,000, $30,000 on a tortoise that's half grown. That's still got a few feet to go. Now for an adult, I barely found anything. Honestly, in the last like 15 years, I think I found like 2 sale postings for adults. It's not a lot to go off. So if you really want a Galapagos tortoise and you're in the perfect storm of a situation to buy one, you are going to have to probably get one smaller. So I reached out to some people because I'm not a breeder. Again, if I'm not a breeder. So if any of these prices that I talked about today were off, I'm sorry. I'm not a breeder. I just educate. I don't know. But I reached out to some tortoise people on some tortoise Facebook pages. And from what I can tell, if you have an adult like 4 to 5 foot Galapagos tortoise, you really don't usually let that go. You don't usually sell that unless there's like a really good reason to. And if you have a giant female Galapagos tortoise, you hold on to that thing to your deathbed. You do not let go of that whatsoever. So from what I was told, if you want an adult giant Galapagos tortoise, the price range is anywhere from $50,000 to almost $90,000 for one. So for the cost of your average state college student loan debt, you can get one of the world's largest reptiles and longest living animals. So that was part 2 of 5 of the most expensive pet reptiles out there for sale in the United States. If you'd like to support us a little bit, check out the Patreon link down in the description. You get cool perks like early access to YouTube videos and sneak peeks of new animals we got coming up. Like the video if you learned something. Subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you later.